can't even see. How am I supposed to fight?
Your eyes can deceive you. Don't trust them.
Taken at face value, such words may initially seem meaningless, devoid of any weight, depth, or perhaps they may even be considered cliché. In isolation, this proclamation may even hold some merit, which is precisely why we should always remind ourselves about the importance of not forgetting the people behind such statements and quotations. Nor should we neglect the factors that contributed to a declaration, such as who said it, when they said it, and most importantly, why they said it. In other words, context matters. So what does this have to do with Tales of the Jedi? Well, the words mentioned at the beginning were spoken by Obi-Wan Kenobi, a once prestigious Jedi Master whom commanded the multitude during the Clone War, and now found himself hunted by the very system he fought so hard to protect. This, combined with the fall of the Jedi Order and that of the majority of its members, left Obi-Wan in a very different place. A place where the fall of Anakin to the dark side only reinforced in his mind the necessity of protecting and mentoring Luke. Like everyone and everything else, Obi-Wan in A New Hope is a product of his surroundings and the people that have touched his life both in the past and in the present. Two people that are of particular import in my opinion are Count Dooku and Ahsoka Tano. Whether directly or indirectly, these two characters have molded Obi-Wan in a certain manner, and fortunately, Tales of the Jedi focuses its 6 episodes exploring these two personas from various points in their lives. Now, in order to keep this structured, I'm gonna assort these episodes in a chronological order and obviously separate them into 2 timelines, Dooku's and Ahsoka's. But before we go any further, just know that there are full spoilers ahead for Tales of the Jedi. Episodes 1, 5, and 6 all follow Ahsoka in various points of her life. Life and Death, the first episode of the series, opens up with a shot of a village at nighttime, where we can see that a villager is overjoyed and excited to announce that a new child has been born. Following what seems to be tradition, an elderly woman comes to bless the newborn. The baby, as revealed by her mother, is Ahsoka Tano. In the following scene, roughly a year later, we get to see the village in daytime along with its inhabitants as they go about their day-to-day. One of these people is Nak-Il, Ahsoka's father, who's fixing up the roof, and meanwhile Pav-Ti, Ahsoka's mother, walks on out of their home with their daughter safely strapped to her torso. This is obviously in preparation for the hunt, an old custom interlinked with the settlement's history. The two bicker back and forth about the relevance of such practices, but before they can go any deeper, the father ultimately concedes and wishes them to have a good hunt. Before Pav-Ti leaves the confines of the village, she crosses paths with Gantika, the elderly woman we saw before. She blesses both Ahsoka and Pav-Ti before they head out. Jumping to the next scene, we see that the pair is now deep in the woods. The forest is teeming with life, which is something that Pav-Ti points out to Ahsoka. That and the need of honoring and respecting it. Side note, cliché as it may seem, this has a purpose, so hang in there. After a recent hike through the wilderness, Pav spots a group of herbivores feeding on the tall grass. She starts walking slowly towards the sniping position. Here she points the rifle in the pack's direction, chooses her target, lines up the shot, moves the finger ever closer to the cold steel of the blaster's trigger, and takes the shot. The rest of them scatter as the sound of the shot echoes through the landscape. Pav-Ti then moves in to check the kill. The shot connected, but the creature is still hanging onto life. Whether intentionally or unintentionally, Ahsoka's mother uses this opportunity to expose the young child to the concept of death and the impermanence of life. She pulls out a knife, prays for the creature, and deals the finishing blow. As this happens, the music fades out. The camera switches to a wide shot, symbolizing finality, resolution, and most importantly, an end to the suffering. Up next, Pav-Ti prepares the Kaibug for transport, but unbeknownst to her, a large feline is stalking them. Likely attracted to the location via the noise of the shot, or the smell of fresh blood. Ahsoka spots the predator, and their reaction clues in Pav T to the fact that she is in danger. She is caught off guard, but attempts to scare off the predator with a loud noise. However, this fails. So right after, she grabs a rifle and uses it to wrestle with the big cat. Obviously outmatched, she gets tossed around and tossed away from Ahsoka. The animal then turns its attention to the child, and this forces Pav T to fire several shots at it. The gunfire is loud enough to be heard from the village, and so a group of armed settlers immediately move toward the danger zone. When they get there, they find that the creature is still attacking, despite being wounded. However, the hailstorm of blaster bolts coming from the villagers is enough to scare off the creature and save Pav T, but not before the feline snags Ahsoka and takes her away. With the creature gone, they are forced to give up the chase. Following the feline's point of view, we see that it has taken Ahsoka to its burrow, where after laying her down, it proceeds to lick its own wounds clean. I believe this was purposefully included to show that this isn't an unstoppable force of nature, but rather an animal made of flesh and blood that needs to eat just like you and I. It's not good nor evil, it just is. Of course, after Ahsoka sneezes, it gets startled, which makes it perceive the young child as a threat, but also as a meal. But just when the bated breath of the creature couldn't be more palpable, Ahsoka touches its nose with her hand, disarming the beast and effectively changing the paradigm into what could only be described as a cocktail of miraculous circumstances. Switching over to the village, we can see that they are getting ready to extend and expand the search. That is until the growl of the creature announces its presence. Soon after, its silhouette fades into view as it enters the perimeter. The inhabitants ready weapons but lower them as soon as they spot Ahsoka. The feline slowly walks towards the crowd, lowers its neck, and lets Pav T reunite with her daughter. She takes this opportunity to thank the spirits for this miracle, and the predator almost seems to acknowledge it on their behalf. After this, it leaves, allowing the family to be reunited once again. Puzzled by the whole ordeal, Ahsoka's parents turn to Gantuka for answers, to which there only appears to be one. Ahsoka is force sensitive. The fifth episode in the series and the second in Ahsoka's timeline is called Practice Makes Perfect. This episode takes us to the Jedi Temple in Coruscant, where Anakin is rushing to watch Ahsoka as she takes part in a test. He enters the room and walks past Plo Koon, Yoda, Mace Windu, and finally sits down next to Obi-Wan. Much to Caleb Doom's amazement, who is also in attendance, Ahsoka makes short work of the sim droids and passes the test with flying colors. Although everyone seems to be really happy with her performance, Anakin is not. He feels that the test doesn't go far enough. Even here, Anakin already shows how independent he is from the Order at large, and how unorthodox his methods are proving to be. The individuality, isolation, independence are displayed perfectly by the camera shot, where both Master and Padawan are the only ones in frame, with their silhouettes in direct contrast with the Coruscant skyline. Before they part ways, Anakin promises to arrange a real test for Ahsoka, one which will truly put her skills under scrutiny. Jumping to the next scene, a gunship is quickly approaching, landing just outside the building where Ahsoka is supposed to meet with her master. She and Anakin go inside, where Rex and his troopers are waiting for them. With Ahsoka in position and weapons set to stun, the test can finally begin. After a few moments of unease, the first trooper opens fire, but she deflects that shot. A couple more troopers open fire, but have their shots deflected as well. However, directly after that, one clone manages to take her down. After an hour of being out cold, Ahsoka wakes up to find that the test is not over yet. She gets up, deflects a few shots, but gets stunned shortly thereafter. Again and again she gets up only to be put down. The cumulative effect of the stun rounds is evidently taking its toll both on her reflexes and her morale. Anakin meets her frustration with his reasoning. The more difficult the test, the easier real combat will be, and the better her chances will be for survival. She tries again, and admittedly there's improvement, however they end up knocking her out, sending us through a time skip. Our characters are now aboard a Venator-class Star Destroyer, more specifically in the hangars. Ahsoka wakes up from a stun-induced nap. Rex helps her up and tells her about the new record she has set, 5 minutes of straight-up bolt deflection. A new round of practice begins. Shots are fired repeatedly. The light coming from all the stun rounds reflect off of Anakin's face as he watches his apprentice growing stronger and more adept at dealing with threats. However, one shot is all it takes, and so Rex crashes Ahsoka's party with 2 unexpected stuns. In the next scene, we are once again aboard a Venator, but this time, something's clearly different. Or rather, a lot of things. Ahsoka's attire looks different, and the hallways are empty, but full of smoke. This is the aftermath of Order 66, the final episode of the Clone Wars to be exact. Rex and Ahsoka are walking through the hallway toward the hangars, bent on executing their escape plan. With all the clones waiting for them on the other side of the doors, Rex can only hope that Anakin's test had its intended effect. Ahsoka's timeline comes to a close with Episode 6, titled Resolve. This episode takes us to Naboo, more precisely to its capital, Theed. The wide shot of the city encompasses both the grand scale of the event and the oppressive atmosphere that permeates throughout. This is the last goodbye to the late Padme Amidala, and thousands are in attendance, paying their respects in an environment filled with candles, grief, and dread. Amongst the crowd, some familiar faces can be seen. 2 of these people are Senator Bail Organa and Senator Mon Mothma. But there's a third, one that's covered by a cloak. Bail notices this cloaked individual and decides to follow. The identity of the cloaked person is revealed to be Ahsoka. She wanted to attend the funeral, but for obvious reasons couldn't do so without adopting some preventative measures. In an attempt to take advantage of the crowds and the concealment they provide, Ahsoka leaves the ceremony before it reaches its end. She finds herself walking through empty hallways, alone and isolated. In spite of this isolation, some friends do remain, and Bail is one of them. He catches up to her and calls out. A brief exchange then ensues, one where the Senator tries to comfort Ahsoka. He knows that the events that have been and are happening around them are too grandiose in scope. Neither him or her had the power to stop the events that unfolded around the galaxy. We'll get to this later. Before the 2 of them can say more, they are interrupted by an incoming patrol. Bail guides Ahsoka toward the river where her ship is located. Organa hands her a comlink device so they can communicate and coordinate in the future, should the need arise. However, the young Togruta has grown weary of war and fighting, and so she refuses. Once again, their conversation is cut short by the same patrol. Having spotted them beforehand, Ahsoka quickly hides, leaving her friend to contend with the troopers. They check his ID, prompting a little chat to ensue. By carefully picking his words, he's able to both maintain a conversation with the clones and, at the same time, deliver his message to Ahsoka. He reminds her of their duties and that they should persist despite the circumstances. Bail also reminds her that he is only one call away in case she ever needs anything. These words hit Ahsoka like a shotgun, but she wouldn't act on them for the time being. The troopers then escort Bail back to the procession, thus giving Ahsoka a window of opportunity to escape. She returns to the ship, which is being guarded by Rex. At some point after they leave the planet, the 2 part ways as a means of lowering their profile. In the next scene, we are transported to another planet. The sun shines on the idyllic landscape composed of both mountainous terrain and farmland, stretching as far as the eye can see. Breaking up the vastness of this region is a small village and an agricultural plantation. There we can find multiple farmers working hard so they can make ends meet. Regardless of the workload, the work environment seems to be relaxed, laid back, and the people seem to be happy with their simple lifestyle. Ahsoka now lives among them, and chooses to keep to herself. It's clear some time has passed, as she seems to have gotten used to her new lifestyle. All is well until one of the villagers, who I'm just gonna call the Sun, chooses to order the droid to load the transport with more weight than what it could realistically handle. He's warned about the oversight, but chooses to ignore it in order to maximize the quantity delivered per trip. Before the argument between the siblings can go any further, the oldest farmer announces that it's time for a break. This prompts the young man to leave the droids working unsupervised and on their own. It would turn out to be a bad call, as the sheer weight of all that hay begins to topple the transport over. The daughter, who had her back turned to the cart, almost gets crushed. Fortunately, Ahsoka intervenes by discreetly using the Force to save her. Her discretion would prove to be insufficient, as the young woman saw her hand reaching out, indicating that the Jedi was reaching out through the Force. After she's comforted by her family, and presumably after the damage is assessed, the villagers finally get a chance to stop and take a break. During said break, the daughter sees that Ahsoka has chosen to eat alone. Intent on showing appreciation, she invites Ashla over so she can eat and sit next to them. The villagers then start discussing their living conditions under the Empire. The man, who I'm just gonna call the father, complains about the Imperial production quotas and their ever-increasing demand. The son defends the Empire by reminding them how quickly and eagerly all of them accepted the Empire. The two bicker back and forth about the topic, but basically, the son believes that Palpatine brought peace to an unstable, war-torn galaxy by establishing order and persecuting traitors/insurgents, while the father believes that this imperial peace is a farce, and anyone can be targeted by the authoritarian elite. The daughter, on the other hand, believes that their current safety is not to be credited to the Empire, but to something else entirely, or rather, to someone else. Fast forward to nighttime, and the daughter is now reminding Ahsoka that they're going to be delivering the harvest in the next morning. Ahsoka is concerned about the route's safety, but such concerns do little to dissuade the daughter from taking part in the trip. After all, with a Jedi Master, her safety is assured. Ahsoka tries to deny her suspicions, but this only serves to reinforce what the young woman believes to be true. Before the Jedi can contest these claims any further, the daughter vows to keep it a secret. It wouldn't remain a secret for long, however, as the brother was listening in on the entire conversation. And given what we know about his ideological makeup, we can assume the worst. In the next morning, the transport is loaded, and as established before, the daughter and the Jedi will be the ones tasked with delivering and selling the harvest. As they are departing from the village, the son wishes for the Force to be with them. And this worries Ahsoka, for it has become clear that her past is no longer a secret. After a long day full of travel, negotiation, and work, the two women return to the settlement. The landscape is now dark, and the silence of nighttime is only interrupted by the daughter's voice. She stops talking when the sight of her entire village on fire slowly comes into view. The two freeze for a moment, in shock. A dark silhouette now stands in the middle of the burning houses, holding both the father and the son hostage until the supposed Jedi arrives. The Empire has sent one of its enforcers. The fact that the Jedi isn't in the village does not bode well for the hostages. The Inquisitor grows impatient and presumably seems ready to kill the two men that remain. Ahsoka puts a stop to this by announcing that she's the Jedi. Surprised, the Force user turns around to face her. Still unsure about her identity, however, he contemplates his target. But before long, the son denounces Ahsoka as the Jedi, much to the dismay of the daughter, who begs him to stop. The enforcer then decides to reward the young man with death by positioning himself behind a hostage in order to strike him down with his crimson red lightsaber. Ahsoka uses the Force to put a stop to it. This piques the executioner's interest, prompting him to move closer to his target. She braces for the fight ahead, carefully observing his stance and his movement. He, on the other hand, closes in on Ahsoka with a constant pace, fueled by his insatiable desire for hunting Jedi. But as fate would have it, his greed and lust for power would blind him from seeing and responding accordingly to Ahsoka's moves. The young but experienced Togruta would dodge his sword swings and disable his lightsaber, then she would use said saber to bring him down. When the dust settles, all that's left is a family deprived of their home, their livelihood, their dignity, and their life. The daughter scolds her sibling for what he has done to them. He apologizes to Ahsoka for his dark deeds. While she may no longer be part of the Order, she still follows the Jedi Code and seeks no revenge for the betrayal. With the location compromised due to this incident, and with the family no longer possessing a home, Tano helps them relocate to a new location. To that effect, she calls upon her old friend, Bail Organa. He arrives the very next day with the ship in order to pick up the family. Surprised by her actions, Bail informs her that things have only gotten worse. Then he asks her if she's ready to uphold her duties once again. After a moment of hesitance, Ahsoka nods and commits herself to the fight. Ahsoka's timeline does a good job in filling in a couple of gaps in her story, more precisely in between the main events of her life, from her birth all the way up to her eventual escape from the Purge. Born into loving parents and into a small community, she would be taught about the importance of respecting life and its inherent value. Like I said previously, this may seem cliché, but this lesson is what molded Ahsoka into a protector as opposed to an aggressor. Had she been born into an environment where killing was treated as a casual practice and life held no more value than simply utilitarian, she would have turned out to be a very different person. The encounter with an apex predator also forced Ahsoka to unknowingly use the Force at an early age, strengthening her connection to it, and, at the same time, exposing her tribe to a miracle. This event would be the reason that the Jedi would take notice of her. Well, that and the fact that Gantika was there and knew what was happening and what needed to be done. Without her wisdom, Ahsoka might have grown without the knowledge to control her abilities, and a lot could have happened. She could have grown old without fully understanding her powers, or she might have turned to crime with her supernatural talents, or maybe she would have lost her connection to it altogether. In sum, her parents and the tribe gave her the necessary moral and emotional foundations, which would play a major role in determining what kind of person she would become later in life. So by the time Master Plo brought her into the Order, she was already a nurtured child. It was then up to the Order to take Ahsoka and teach her about the ways of the Jedi, and how they came to exercise control and restraint over their powers. Although the Order had become entangled with matters that they shouldn't, and had adopted practices that fostered ignorance and temptation, it still had at its disposal a substantial amount of extremely skilled Force users. In that sense, Ahsoka was very lucky to be inducted into the Order at this time, as it allowed her to learn from many wise and powerful Jedi Masters. The most important and prominent of these was of course Anakin. Where he lacked in patience and restraint, he made up for in heavy and disciplined training, outside of the box thinking, and a powerful grip on his abilities. All of these variables were fueled and driven by his desire and need to protect those he cared for and loved at any cost. When it came to his Padawan, this would drive him to search for novel and more practical methods of preparing her for life and death situations. Stunts like the one in Practice Makes Perfect might seem extreme, but they would end up transforming Ahsoka into a formidable Force user, and with time and experience on the battlefront, she would also build great rapport with her troops. Even as the war raged on, her forces could still count on her to be a resilient leader. Despite the galaxy-shaking events that were happening at the time of Order 66, the young Jedi never wavered in her pursuit of not harming the clones who, as of now, wouldn't hesitate to kill her. However, as life would have it, she wouldn't be able to save everybody. In fact, she was only able to save one, Rex. He was one of the few friends that remained after the long and bloody war. But instead of rest and peace, these people who said no to the new government would spend the rest of their lives in hiding or on the run. After the two-part ways, Ahsoka would retreat into a life of seclusion, routine, and normalcy. Her whole life had been devoted to the Jedi. The Order had devoted itself to protect the Republic, and the Republic devoted itself to Palpatine. This would lead Ahsoka to realize that all of her sacrifices, all of her effort, all of her lost friends and family were nothing more than an offering for a ritual that brought the Empire upon the galaxy. She was now jaded, discouraged, and disillusioned. She was now in hiding. Still, when danger arose, and she had to risk her anonymity and by extension her safety, she did so without a second thought. It speaks volumes about her character. A woman who lost so much was willing to put her life on the line for those who could not protect themselves. This eventually led Ahsoka to acquire a renewed faith in her instincts and emotions. It's for this reason that she decides to resist the Empire. Such resistance would mean she was no longer a fugitive, but a wanted rebel. Episodes 2 through 5 cover Count Dooku's timeline. Episode 2, Justice, takes place many years before the Phantom Menace and opens up with a scene in space where a ship is quickly approaching a planet. Qui-Gon Jinn is piloting the ship and his master is traveling as a passenger. In this scene, he enters the cockpit in order to supervise the landing maneuver and also to deliver instructions. Dooku orders Qui-Gon to land in a place located a bit farther away from the village they're going to. This is a simple preventative measure meant to avoid causing further distress between the locals and the Jedi. The area where they land is characterized by grey cloudy skies, devastated forests, and a foggy surface. Both Master and Padawan step out of the ship and into this reality. Their well-kept appearance and self-adjusted presence contrasts heavily with this unkept and forsaken land. The ruined crops, the malfunctioning droids, and the rusty equipment do a good job of communicating to the two Jedi that not all parts of the Republic are represented justly. In the misty pathways of the village, both the people and the pets present seem to be malnourished and mistreated. These streets, although empty, say a lot. However, with no answers provided for their questions, the two head for the settlement's bar, hoping for a resolution. When the door opens, the people in there take notice of the strangers and everything stops. Dooku asks, "Where is the child?" But there's no response. He then asks, "Where is the senator's son?" This prompts a woman to ask for a good reason as to why they should tell him. As both master and apprentice walk toward this woman, two men stand up, a clear sign that they mean to protect her. Dooku, intent on achieving a resolution, decides to cut through the pointless back and forth. He sits down in the same table as these people and puts his lightsaber on the table as a means of clarifying who he is, what he represents, and what comes next. The woman, although surprised to find out that they're Jedi, doesn't believe they've come to uphold everyone's interests. She also goes on to lament the effects of Dagonet's long-standing policies. Puzzled by this, Qui-Gon questions her about their rights to vote bad politicians such as Dagonet out of office. Surely if they don't like him, they can just vote him out. After contemplating for a bit about the senator's initial motivations and moral integrity, she caves and decides to guide the Jedi to the son. It turns out that all of these people took part in the kidnapping. The boy is being held in a barn under constant supervision. After questioning the boy about his well-being, he reveals that he's been treated fairly. Much more fairly than all these people have been treated. Even as a Jedi, Qui-Gon is surprised to see that he harbors no ill will for these people and what they did. He believes they had no choice. Since he rarely leaves the capital, he wasn't aware of these subpar living conditions and standards. In other words, he's been sheltered from the real world, he's been sheltered from hardship, and he's been sheltered from his father's decaying moral integrity. Speaking of which, one of the villagers warns the others about the senator's arrival and that of his troops. The locals feel betrayed, as it seems that this was a deception on part of the Jedi Master. Dooku, however, is quick to refute such a notion. With that established, the two Force users accompanied by the residents leave the security of the barn in order to confront the threat. It's also revealed that the woman we saw at the start of the episode led the security detail here, presumably in exchange for food. Dagonet orders Dooku to arrest the kidnappers and, at the same time, force them to release his son. Knowing that there's more to this situation and wishing to be thorough, Dooku refuses this order as it would hinder and interrupt the ongoing investigation. He's also trying to buy in time for negotiations to be held between the people and the politician. Nevertheless, despite Dooku's assurances that his son is safe, Dagonet demands the boy's immediate release and calls upon his guards. Tensions are high. The fingers of both the villagers and the guardsmen are on the triggers, ready to fire. The civilians, however, are outgunned, outnumbered, and outclassed. The senator then tells Dooku to step aside. He refuses. Dagonet arrogantly reminds him that he serves the Senate. Dooku then sternly says, "No, we serve the people of this republic." Upset with the Jedi's defiance, the politician orders the troops to aim. Unsure of what to do, Qui-Gon watches his master closely, looking for guidance. When Dooku lights his lightsaber, so does the Padawan. The Count orders the senator to stand down, but he chooses to open fire instead. Blaster bolts fly. Some are deflected, others hit the villagers, including one inside the barn. Dagonet's son gets to witness the bloodshed being carried out in his name. Outside, the Jedi warriors do their best to protect the people from the aggressors. The Senator orders his soldiers to cease fire as he wishes to speak to the Jedi. Dooku, while catching his breath, looks around and sees all the pain and suffering being caused because of a man and his lust for power and control. In his hubris, the politician proclaims that he will destroy the village and many others like it, so as to make an example out of them. He hopes that this show of force will dissuade others from defying his authority, especially these Jedi. Dooku then snaps and decides to put an end to the madness by force choking the Senator. Qui-Gon tries to stop his master from going through with this, but is quickly force pushed. In the heat of the moment, the Padawan decides to free the son. He's hoping that this reunion will remind Dooku of what he's doing. He's killing a father. This turns out to be a very good idea, because outside, Dooku is no longer trying to reach a compromise or attempting to negotiate. He's trying to cut out the root cause. The Jedi Master dispatches the security detail as he closes in on his target. Bit by bit, Dagonet's life is slowly being drained away. It's only saved by the presence of the son and that of Qui-Gon. These two factors manage to bring the Count back from the brink. Dagonet is relieved to see his son, but while the feeling is mutual, the young man is disappointed with his father, unable to understand how he could do something like this. Presumably after a couple of hours, the settlement is now being repaired by both the residents and the military. The Senator sits down in the car, unable to look at the village or the people. Whether out of shame for what he has done or ashamed for his failed attempt to exercise control, he can't even manage to look away from the ground. I'll let you decide which is which. The son, attempting to make amends, assures the villagers that their suffering will be short-lived. The people, without saying a word, thank both the young man and the two Jedi. Dooku then gazes upon the village, where the circuitry is being repaired, the machinery is being fixed, and the wounds are being tended to. He wonders if any meaningful and permanent change will come as a result of what happened. Qui-Gon then asks him if that desire for change was what motivated him to take action into his own hands. The Jedi Master acknowledges Jin's role in saving many lives by stopping him from going further. The Padawan accredits his success to his decision-making in the heat of the moment. Happy with his apprentice's performance, Dooku shows appreciation for the wise man that Qui-Gon Jinn is quickly becoming. Wiser than even himself. Episode 3, Choices, starts the same way as the previous one, with the ship flying through space and moving toward the planet. But this time, the spacecraft is crewed by Mace Windu and Dooku, as opposed to Dooku and his Padawan. It's clear that some time has passed, but just how much is not apparent. From the dialogue present here, we can infer that these two Jedi have been sent by the Council in order to retrieve Master Katri's body. Master Katri was killed in an ambush on Raxus Secundus. What's particularly interesting about this murder is that the Senator was with Master Katri when she was killed and managed to escape. This obviously raises a lot of questions such as, who ambushed the Senator? Why did they? And most importantly, how did the Senator manage to escape when the Jedi Master could not? These questions provoke different reactions from the two Jedi. Mace believes that they should follow orders and do as they were told, but Dooku feels that they should investigate in order to uncover the truth. Master Katri deserves that much. Landing on the surface, the two Jedi are greeted and welcomed by Senator Larix's security detail. They lead the two Jedi to the Senator in order to proceed with the retrieval. In the next scene, Larix is already recounting the events that happened and led up to the ambush and during it. He was motivated to return to Raxus in order to pacify the tensions between the rebels and the Republic. Dooku is curious as to why he'd go to meet these agitators without a security detail. After all, they were an unknown element. The politician proclaims that he wanted to appease the rebels rather than antagonizing them with armed guards. He also claims that Katri insisted on accompanying him in order to protect him. The man's body language clearly contradicts his proclamations of sadness over the Jedi's death. Dooku is having none of it and insists that they must go to where the ambush happened. Clearly, something more is going on. After one of the guards agrees to take them there, they vacate the room, allowing for Dooku and Mace to reconvene. Mace is no fool and senses that something is up as well. What differentiates these two Jedi is that one believes in effectiveness within the rules, and the other believes in results and justice, rules be damned. Windu suggests that they retrieve the body and inform the Council about this potential deception. Dooku, however, plans on finding out the truth right now rather than later. Using the ship that was previously utilized by the Senator to meet the rebels, they all travel to the crime scene. It's a small clearing within a beautiful forest, full of colorful trees and vegetation. As soon as they exit the ship, the two Jedi start analyzing the clues right away. They examine the footsteps and the blaster markings both in the trees and in the rocks. All of them suggest that the bolts came from the direction of the ship rather than from the trees. The Count, already wary of the Senator, tries to confirm his suspicions by asking him about the exact number of attackers. He says that he doesn't remember the exact number of attackers, claiming that his lack of recollection was provoked by the traumatic nature of the event. He also says that the attackers fired upon her as soon as she exited the ship. Almost certain that the men's involved somehow, Dooku looks toward the ship and sees that the outer hull is completely devoid of blaster marks, proving that the story being told is based on lies. The Jedi Master tries to pressure them by pointing out that the Jedi hardly ever succumb to surprise attacks unless they are betrayed. Unfortunately, before they can go any further, the Senator is shot in the back by the guards. Then they try to kill Mace and Dooku, but this is obviously unsuccessful. They make short work of the security detail and manage to disarm the commanders. One of the commanders tries to fire upon Windu but gets killed by a deflected blaster bolt. The Count then questions Samaj on his reasons for killing Master Khatri. He reveals that he's part of a group within the defense force that found out about Larix's corruption. He was selling out his planet and people for his benefit. Samaj's group sought to put a stop to this by threatening the Senator. Initially nobody was to be killed, but that changed with the presence of Khatri. They saw her as a lapdog to the Senate, and a puppet that only upholds the interests and security of the galaxy's elite. That perception made her a threat to their plans, and so they chose to kill her. The Senator was allowed to live under the condition that he would represent Raxus's interests. Yet again, Dooku is exposed to the fact that the Jedi are no longer keeping the peace for everybody, but rather they're being used as glorified personal security for the few politicians that govern the galaxy. Even worse, the aforementioned politicians are not performing their moral and civil duties, which means that the Jedi are effectively protecting a corrupt system. It's clear that nothing is changing despite Dooku's best efforts. These are the first heartbeats of the separatist movement. In prison, Dooku talks to Samaj. He empathizes with him and advises him to ensure the continued evolution of his methods, his ideology, and his people. I dare say that this is when Dooku decides to seek out alternatives to the Jedi and the Republic's dogma. When nighttime arrives, the Count and Mace are about to leave the planet when Windu admits that the Council probably won't be happy with Dooku's actions. Dooku then queries him on the Jedi Council's blind servitude of the Senate. Will they be able to keep the peace without independent decision-making? Then, with a hint of disapproval, Mace disregards his questions, citing that they are guided by the Council's wisdom as opposed to being guided by politics or ego. This is where Dooku and Windu's philosophies diverge severely, and soon, so will their paths. In the next scene, we are back on Coruscant, where the funeral is being held. Most of the Jedi Council is in attendance, along with many other Jedi Knights. After the ceremony, Dooku is standing alone, apart from the crowd, gazing upon the Coruscant skyline. Visually, it does an amazing job at showing just how isolated Dooku has become. The Jedi Master then spots Windu and pulls him aside. Apparently, Mace will be presented with Khatri's council seat, so Dooku decides to question him on this. He asks him if he knew about this before the mission. Windu denies it, claiming that the only reason that he's being presented with the seat and not Dooku is because of his interference that transformed the simple body retrieval to a full-on criminal investigation. Despite this, he tries to ease Dooku's jealousy by promising to speak on the Count's behalf. Dooku considers this to be an insult rather than genuine concern or care. He then begrudgingly thanks Mace Windu and turns his back on him and the Order. The last episode of Dooku's timeline is episode 4, The Sith Lord. The episode begins with a shot of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. Many years have passed since the events of the last episode, which places this one during the Phantom Menace in terms of the timeline. By this point, Dooku has been in cahoots with Sidious for a while, doing his bidding and learning the ways of the dark side. In fact, in this scene, he's in the Jedi archives with the sole purpose of deleting the information that the Order has about Kamino. This was part of the plot orchestrated by Sidious in order to keep the cloning program a secret until the time was right. After deleting the files, Dooku then talks to Master Jocasta, asking her for insight about the cause for such excitement amongst the people of the temple. She informs him about Qui-Gon's encounter with the Sith Lord on Tatooine. Of course, she does so with a hint of disbelief, as she seems to think that Qui-Gon's strong imagination clouded his perception. Due to his past experiences, and current ones for that matter, the Count laments that such creativity and imagination is shunned and disregarded inside the Order. In the next scene, Qui-Gon is walking with Yaddle through the temple. Dooku catches up to them and questions Qui-Gon about his encounter with the assailant on Tatooine. He confirms that he was a highly skilled warrior, proficient in his use of the Jedi arts. He also believes that Maul was a Sith Lord. Dooku then doubts that the Council believed his claims. Unsurprisingly, the Padawan confirms this to be true. The Count expresses discontent at the Jedi Council's disregard of his warnings about a potential threat. Yaddle interjects, defending the Council, citing their skepticism as a cautious approach to such situations. Before his Padawan leaves, Dooku warns him to be careful around such threats, reminding him that he won't be there to protect him. Qui-Gon then eases his master's worries by assuring him that Obi-Wan fills that role now. Dooku then expresses his willingness to meet Obi-Wan, but as we know, that would not happen until much later. After Jin leaves, Dooku contemplates on the quick passage of time. His student is now a master himself. You can really see how the Count saw Qui-Gon as his son, and in many ways, he was. Jumping forward in time, we are back in the Jedi Temple, but this time, Dooku is mourning the death of his Padawan. He's reflecting upon his death in front of this huge tree. I don't think it's a stretch to say that this tree represents the Tree of Life, the Christian religious symbol. This was the event that broke Dooku. Yaddle tries to inform him about the location of the funeral, but the Count won't be attending. Yaddle doubts that he can let go of his apprentice, but Dooku simply says, "What choice have I?" He then goes to the hangars and leaves the temple. The Blade Runner-esque music along with a high-tech dystopian jungle below set the tone perfectly. Yaddle, concerned with Dooku's mental well-being, decides to shadow him. She manages to follow him to an old, rusty, and massive building. This is where Dooku is meeting with the Sith Lord known as Darth Sidious. The fallen Jedi is here to scold Palpatine for allowing Maul to kill Qui-Gon. This is immediately disregarded by the Sith Lord as a necessary sacrifice in order to bring about his vision into reality. In fact, every sacrifice, every dark deed asked of Dooku was in the name of something greater. Yaddle then decides to reveal herself and attempts to appeal to Dooku's better nature. Palpatine does exactly the opposite, manipulating the Count's aspirations for a fairer, corruptionless system. If he could just do one more thing that his master is asking of him, their dream will be achieved. This is how Palpatine keeps people under control. He tells them what they want to hear, tells them that he knows exactly how to get there, and only asks that they follow his commands without question. If they can just do that, their vision will materialize. Here he uses this technique to manipulate the Count into doing the unspeakable. Dooku attacks Yaddle, striking her with ferocity as if to perform an unpleasant task as quickly as he can. Yaddle tries to disengage so she can appeal to Dooku, but by now it's too late. Dooku drags the transport out of the way, exposing the Jedi Master. The fight continues until Yaddle ends up underneath the hangar's large gate. She points out to Dooku that in trying to get rid of corruption, he has run into the arms of the most corrupt life form out there. This angers Dooku and provokes him into engaging the locking mechanism, seemingly crushing Yaddle. Sidious, pleased with the outcome, verbally appeases Dooku. This type of reward is meant to ensure that the puppet remains invested and loyal. However, out of a sudden, the gate slowly rises, revealing Yaddle. She is using the Force to open the massive gate, allowing for the light to come in. Nevertheless, she tires herself out and falls to the ground. Exhausted because of the huge effort, Yaddle is unable to defend herself from Dooku. He tells her that he only wishes to bring peace and order to the galaxy, just like Anakin will many years later. Yaddle then uses her last breaths to point out the obvious. His actions have caused so much death and suffering in the name of the so-called peace. He then ignites a saber and ends Yaddle's life. Just another step in Darth Tyrannus' descent into his moral grave. Dooku's timeline is an improvement over Ahsoka's, both in its execution and in its philosophical content. As we all know, Dooku was born into royalty, eventually being crowned as the Count of Sereno. Due to this, it can be assumed that the royal was raised to follow strict rules and to live his life in accordance with the highest moral and ethical principles. However, with time, Count Dooku's faith and dedication to the guidelines would erode. This happened gradually and proportionally between both systems that the Jedi Master was representing. Discounting the exceptions, most individuals come to this world as clean slates, only becoming jaded, tainted, and corrupted as they navigate through life and its hardships. The Count was no different. In Episode 2, Justice, Dooku starts out as a stern nobleman. He was there to simply return a child to its parent, but as the facts became clear and the motivations unraveled, the man was presented with many questions. The answers, however, were not so plentiful. Securing the son's release would turn out to be the easy part. The hard part would be Dagonet. Still intent on serving both the people and the Republic, he tries to reach a compromise. Sure, these people were the kidnappers, but they were driven to this by the subpar living conditions imposed on them by the Senator's policies. His diplomatic nature and faith in the system would both be strained and challenged when confronted with the corruption of this public servant and the fallibility of the Republic at large. Once he was presented with such a predicament, he chose to take action into his own hands and enact the change that the system was failing to implement. Of course, killing Dagonet would not change things for the better. Someone else would take his place, the corruption would persist, and Dooku would be tried for murder. Luckily, Qui-Gon managed to sway his master and stopped him. Nevertheless, this would end up changing Dooku forever, because from this point forward, he would become much more of a skeptic, with a high proclivity to bend and outright ignore the rules. He would still manage to hold on to his principles, but now his tolerance for corruption, red tape, and unchecked authority would vanish overnight. He would become a conflicted master. This internal conflict would only worsen as the years passed. Long after his standoff with Dagonet, Dooku would find himself facing corruption once again. Lyric was selling out his planet in order to upkeep his luxurious lifestyle. However, elements in the Rax's defense force tried to put a stop to this by blackmailing the Senator with his own life. It was this scuffle between these two parties that would lead to a Jedi Master's death. This murder would prompt the Jedi to dispatch Windu and Dooku to retrieve the body and, unintentionally, exposing the already wary Jedi Master to the uncomfortable truth yet again. The Republic was failing its people, not just sporadically, but consistently. It was breeding the parasites and starving the hosts. People like Samaj saw this and sought to change the status quo. A paradigm where the Jedi became an extended arm of the Senate, as opposed to neutral keepers of the peace, and a paradigm where the politicians used worlds like Raxus to enrich themselves instead of upholding and honoring their oaths. This continued exposure to the pitfalls of both the Order and the Republic would turn out to be the realities that incentivized Dooku to search for alternatives. This is where his desire for a fairer society gave birth to the Confederacy, conceptually of course. Upon his return to the temple, the Count would be given even more reasons to question the leadership. With only a single vacant seat in the Jedi Council, the monastic leadership chose Windu over Dooku. This would exacerbate the feelings of estrangement present within the Count. Despite of what it may look like, this state of mind wasn't just spawned out of jealousy, but out of resentment too. By rewarding Windu for his dogmatic ways, the Council had just proved that it had little need for free thinkers. Ironically, they demanded the same homogeneity present within the droid and clone armies of the future. All of this mistrust and faithlessness in both the Republic and the Jedi would lead Dooku to search for answers and knowledge elsewhere. This is where Palpatine comes in. He'd exploit Dooku's resentment toward the Jedi and the Republic to install him as the leader for the Separatist movement, a movement which had been growing during this time. Like every good manipulator, Palpatine told Dooku all he wanted to hear, thus ensuring his cooperation. He promised the Count a political system free of corruption, ignorance, and complacency, a government free of the Republican system and the monastic, dogmatic Jedi Order. The two of them would work behind the scenes, preparing both armies, escalating tensions, and furthering their interests. The disenfranchised populations of the Outer Rim would flock toward the Count's leadership, hoping for better living conditions, free from the galaxy's elite. What they didn't know is that their separatist movement was being meticulously cultivated by the Sith in order to nurture and create and control the opponent to the Republic. By the same token, Dooku's grievances and aspirations were being used by Sidious as well. He would use the Count to do his bidding. This way, nothing could be traced back to him. With every plot, with every scheme, and with every dark deed, Dooku grew ever more detached from his morality, from his vision, and from the Order. All of his deeds, although questionable, were being done in the name of a better society, or so he was told. You see, Dooku recognized his conduct as immoral, but the greater good made those actions morally permissible. It's just like every other visionary in history. Their utopia must come into existence, regardless of the price of admission. When his apprentice died, the Jedi Order's failure with Dooku was complete. He was now a disillusioned individual. By the time Yaddle confronted him, the Count was too far gone. Like a thief who stole many times before. Once, it was just a one-time thing, but now he had done it so many times that he couldn't even stomach the thought of redeeming himself. Dooku had essentially been reprogrammed, adopting Palpatine's goals instead of his own. His morality, principles, and royal attributes were replaced with greed, lust for power, and an obsession with the dark side. And yet, throughout the following years and up until the end of his life, there are moments where he tries to undermine his master's plan, either by seeking help from people like Obi-Wan during their encounter on Geonosis, or by taking up apprentices under his tutelage. His motives are somewhat ambiguous, but personally, I believe that Dooku was a man that sought to change things for the better. But during his journey, certain moments of vulnerability were ultimately exploited by Sidious in order to control him. The more crimes he committed in order to bring about his master's vision for a better future, the more he spiraled out of control and into the abyss. It's likely that he still intended to create that new utopia, but he would be the one in control, not Sidious. He tried to fight corruption with corrupt means, and for that he paid a high price, but got nothing for it. A classical tale of a man who wanted to do good, and in order to do that, became a pure pragmatist. However, pragmatism doesn't always coincide with moralism. When devoid of personal involvement, perception becomes everything. Tales of the Jedi is a short series that wastes no time in exploring its main characters. Its 6 episodes cover 2 people with 2 very different lives, but most importantly, it goes over what those 2 characters chose to do with their environment, what opportunities they had, what shaped them, and how they're remembered. One is a story of growth, effort, and acceptance, and the other is one of justice, corruption, and disillusionment. Just consider these titles for a second. Nurtured child, resilient leader, wounded rebel. Stern nobleman, conflicted master, disillusioned individual. It is no coincidence that I chose to classify Ahsoka with a title at the end of each episode, whereas Dooku got classified at either the beginning or the middle. To me, it seemed like the best way to illustrate what the whole series is about: the nurture and growth of Ahsoka, and the degradation and corruption of Count Dooku. But there is an overarching theme as well. We now know these characters because we know their story. The adjectives I've used to describe them have been chosen specifically for who they were throughout their lives. I tried to categorize them as fairly as possible without letting the more simplistic labels of villain/hero sour my appraisal. This is what I believe to be the most important message of the show: context. Without it, we are at the mercy of misrepresentation, mischaracterization, and ignorance. The random whims of society and civilization may sometimes lead to the omission or censure of data points that could prove crucial in guaranteeing the foundation of an understanding based on reason and truth. But context can do so much more for us than just vindication. It can show us why people adopted their ideals and said what they said. You see, words are just that. Words. What gives them power or deprives them of power is intent. The intent behind an hello, a goodbye, determines if those words are just simple etiquette or heartfelt expressions of emotion. This is why a seemingly bland quote like "your eyes can deceive you, don't trust them" conveys so much more to me now, and hopefully it conveys a lot more for you too, as well.